regularly. By mid-May, he was enduring fever and chill cycles that saw his temperature rise to 104 degrees and went through 6 or 7 shirts a day, but he never missed a public appearance or left his room until the last hand was shaken. By May 27th, the stone had still not passed after the doctors all but demanded he receive treatment. He agreed to go to the Mayo Clinic of Minnesota for a new treatment that would get rid of the stones and allow him to get back on the trail within a week. He agreed on the condition that his out-of-state treatment not be released to the press. He worried Texans would resent him for leaving Texas for the treatment. On May 30th, the experimental treatment called cystostopic manipulation, which was removing the stress of the urethra, was performed successfully. In recovery, Johnson kept staffers and 3 phones in his room at all times. He worked on his campaign in the hospital, calling Texas as many as 64 times a day. He was back within a week, campaigning harder than ever. Of course, then, around Election Day, the most infamous issue that took place at the time was these tainted vote totals in South Texas that, more than anything else, won the election for him. And, of course, that was from his loss to Pappy O'Daniel. He knew he needed to change around next time. Aside from shifting right politically, he knew that he would, again, sit on the ballot boxes in as many counties as possible. He knew that Stevenson would try and stuff ballot boxes like O'Daniel did, so he ordered Johnson not only to watch Stevenson to stop him from stuffing the said ballot boxes, but also decided to order them to stuff more ballot boxes than Stevenson did so they would win. The runoff election was, again, scheduled for Saturday, August 28th, the evening. Stevenson was leading, but by 9 a.m., LBJ had gained the lead after 979,877 votes total were counted. By Monday evening, Stevenson regained the lead, and on Thursday, September 2nd, he was announced the official winner by 362 votes. So, unlike Stevenson, though, Johnson had prepared for a close race, and this time again called on George Parr to bail him out. But he made a mistake in instructing his supporters to only watch the voting stations on Sunday. So this is the big Stevenson mistake here. Johnson had ordered his men to watch the stations the entire week. According to H.Y. Price, a Johnson campaign insider, LBJ went so far to tap Stevenson's phones. Anytime Stevenson or his men called the stations and asked for votes, LBJ immediately called his watchmen and told them to be on their toes. So they knew how many votes Stevenson was adding into the whole total here. After the official results were announced on Thursday, the real conspiracy began. And early on Friday, September 3rd, election officials in a little southern town we told you about before, Alice, announced the returns released earlier in that week were incorrect. Officials in Alice said they found additional 203 ballots in their box 13. Of those 203 ballots, 202 were for Lyndon B. Johnson. And those were the votes that were cast in pretty much all alphabetical order with the same ink, same handwriting, same everything. And those were those counties controlled by George Parr, the political boss, the Duke of Duval County, as they called them. So, during Stevenson's 3 gubernatorial bids, Parr supported him with large margins like he did with Johnson in 1948. But in 1944, Stevenson made a questionable decision. Parr had asked Stevenson to appoint Jimmy Kazin, a personal and political friend of the district attorney of Laredo County. Instead, at a military official's request, Stevenson appointed S. Truman Phelps to the position and cleaned up prostitution around the Laredo Air Force Base. Parr never forgave Stevenson. Besides, Parr liked LBJ because of his style and courage, and Johnson had helped Parr receive a pardon for income tax evasion. Stevenson, of course, was outraged and rightfully declared LBJ's votes were fraudulent. Johnson countered with claims probably also accurate that many of Stevenson's votes were fraudulent. Stevenson initially sought justice with the State Democratic Executive Committee. After a debate that included many harsh accusations, the committee agreed fraud played a part on both sides, but awarded the election to Johnson literally, again, by a final vote of 29-28. The deciding vote was placed by Charlie Gibson, a drunk committee member rushed into the last minute by Johnson's supporters. With a party convention dominated by Truman Democrats assuring Johnson of another sure victory, Stevenson realized he would now have to seek justice through the courts, which, again, he tried and did not do. So that's pretty much the moral of the story there. But, this is really kind of another interesting thing. Historical what if. There were so many times, for example, just in the kind of run-up to the Kennedy assassination, There was actually a story that was right about to be published. And I'm quoting directly here now from Robert A. Caro's book, Passage of Power, The Years of Lyndon Johnson. In the days before John F. Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was caught up in an escalating corruption scandal that, at the very least, might have meant that he would be removed from the 1964 ticket, if not forced to resign as vice president or serve time in prison. Johnson had been involved in a pay-for-play influence practice so pervasive that it had turned over a lifelong government employee into a millionaire many times over. In fact, at the very moment Kennedy was assassinated, Delaware Senator John J. Williams, Committee Counsel Barrett Van Kirk, and General Accounting Office Accountant Lauren Drennan were interrogating insurance broker Don B. Reynolds on the subject, and the editors of Life magazine were debating whether they should run a second story on the scandal in their next edition. Reynolds told Williams that in 1957, having been advised that a political connection would be helpful in building up his insurance business, he contacted LBJ protege Bobby Baker, a fellow South Carolinian, and they entered into an agreement which he would make payments to Baker because, as Reynolds put it, of his social contracts and wide knowledge or contacts and his wide knowledge of people whom he could present to me. So pretty much a pay-to-play scheme and how they could introduce an LBJ. And as a Senate Majority Leader, he was just in a pay-to-play scheme there. So the delight really was just in there for everyone. They did a lot of kind of pay-to-play schemes, exchanging gifts for services, all that kind of good stuff. And apparently Lady Bird was involved in it too. Some kind of fake signing of checks and very, very corrupt practices that you can find out more and more in the book that you pretty much get the idea of. I don't have to go over it, but we do get the results here. So Johnson has quieted the speculation by his unequivocal denials and that there was any relationship. He said it over and over for 20 years that the LBJ company was entirely his white business and he had nothing to do with it, and that, as he claimed in one of his such statements, all of that is owned by Miss Johnson. I don't have any interest in government-regulated industries and never have had. But if Lyndon Johnson had no interest in the LBJ company, why was it taking out insurance on his life? And of course, his denials had admitted that salient fact, as Texas was a community property state, and therefore, since Lyndon Johnson had an interest or half interest in all the company's income, if he had become rich. If Reynolds' statements became public, it would cast doubt on Johnson's claim there was no connection between the LBJ and the LBJ company, and once that connection was established, the company's financial dealings would become a subject of journalistic inquiry. Johnson had arrived in Congress poor, and during his career had ostensibly had no source of income other than his government salary. He had been boasting to friends for years that he was a millionaire, and by 1963, he, a man who had never held any job but his government position and whose salary had never been more than $35,000 a year, was not merely a millionaire, but a millionaire many times over. So pretty much the point here was he was incredibly corrupt. What happens? Kennedy gets shot. He gets sworn in as president, and that story is shelved, never to return. Just some of the few stories that really make up an incredible, incredible career. Happy to tell them to you here on this episode of Uprising.